This is the World Satsanga on the 22nd of July 2017 in conjunction with Kevin Moore and The Moore Show. And it's an honour again to work with Kevin and have the World Satsangas broadcast on his YouTube medium as well. So this month's format is a short talk by myself on what the difference between an entity and a being is, how do they come into existence and what the evolutionary process is for both. Then we've got questions from the participants, those people who listen to the Satsanga and actively communicate with me. And then I've got a change to the end of meet meditation. One of my readers has requested a meditation to deal with keeping the ego at bay. And it's very interesting because I've really felt that our egos are having a big opportunity to take us over again in the last few weeks. So I think that that's probably a better meditation for now rather than the meditation to connect with others. I think it'd be more powerful for us and more appropriate right now. Okay, so let's look at the difference between an entity and a being. And to be honest, I found this information out whilst I'm doing the channeling work and subsequently the typing up for the text for the book I'm currently writing on called The Curators, which deals with those entities that deal with the maintenance of the multiverse, keeping it in its evolutionary efficiency, so to speak, so we can maximise our opportunity whilst incarnate and whilst we're experiencing the multiverse. And I found myself writing the words being and entity to describe something that is sentient. And I then sort of wondered what was going on there, and Source advised me that there was a difference between a being and an entity. And I found this really quite interesting. So an entity is basically sentience and a body of sentience associated with that sort of body of energy, as I say, associated with the sentience. Now, sentience and energy aren't co-joined. Sentience can be individual to the energy. It's just that usually sentience is associated with energy because it's useful. It allows the manipulation of the structure of the multiverse, local multiverse, so to speak, or the environment, and/or itself. More easily. Sentience itself it can be totally divorced from energy. So a body of energy isn't the human body. It's an energy that is used by the sentience. That's either been commandeered by that sentience or it's been given to that sentience. So taking that into consideration, our source entity created our true energetic selves, which we sometimes call the Godhead in Hindu texts, or the Oversoul. In Dolores Cannon's work, or the higher self in a general westernized way, to help it experience, learn and evolve in a more efficient and faster way by having smaller versions of itself delve into the more minute detail of itself, and that part of itself that is separated out for investigation in that way, which was the multiverse. And so when it created our true energetic selves, it separated out and individualized portions of its sentience and portions of the energy associated with that sentience to give us our true energetic selves. It created billions of these different entities, if you want to call them. I'll call them entities right now, because they were created. So basically, an entity is something that is created by something. So our aspects, what we call the soul, in more wider terms, is created. It's an entity. So an aspect or a soul is an entity because it's created through individualization of sentience and energy from the true energetic self. And a shard is an entity because it's a further individualization of sentience and energy from the aspect or soul. So here we have an amount of step down function from source entity to shard. Now, similarly, because the origin created the source entities, they are also entities and not beings. So what we have here is that the origin created the source entity by, again, individualizing a smaller aspect of its sentience and the energy that is attached to that sentience to create the source entities. And so the creation of something with sentience and energy as a result of individualization or any other form of creation or manipulation of sentience and energy can create an entity. Okay? An autonomous, although we're always connected to our creator and ultimately our creator's creator, etc., individualized sentient energy is a being. Is an entity. I'm getting confused myself now. So individualized sentient energy is an entity. Okay. Now a being is different because a being is something which evolves. Now that doesn't mean that an entity doesn't evolve. They both evolve, and the evolutionary process, which I'll go over in very minute detail, is the same for both of them basically. But to get to the point of sentience, a being has to, in effect, evolve. Now, in the Origin Speaks, there's a chapter towards the end that shows the steps towards sentience, and this is basically what happens to an energy. Energies themselves are normally sort of like free. They move around, they do what they have to do, they go with the ebb and flow of things that manipulate them, and or the natural flows of energies around the origin, the source entity, and even ourselves. But energies that coalesce together because they attract each other can eventually create minor intelligence. And that minor intelligence is attractivity. And so energies of a similar type will coalesce together and group together with energies of a similar type. The old saying, birds of a feather flock together, springs to mind, yeah? And people who are like-minded stay together. So this is the same thing. So these energies move together. They coalesce together, and they generate over a period of time or space, event space that is, a rudimentary intelligence of attractivity and beyond. There's a desire to commune or co-join with other energies of the same type, and so we have the birth of a more structured form of intelligence, going from basic attractivity up to actively seeking out other energies. And as these energies coalesce together with other energies of a similar type of intelligence, the intelligence grows to the point of being actively intelligent. And so there's a move then to become sort of aware, and then self-aware, and then conscious. And so as the energies get bigger and bigger, and get more and more intelligence, they start to become more aware and more self-aware and more conscious. And so we start to have not just intelligence, but active intelligence, conscious intelligence. And then we get to the point where that conscious intelligence starts to create things, because it likes to create, or it likes the experience of the creation, or it likes to be able to work with that creation. And then we get to the point where that creation is modified to try to do better, for instance, and improve. And then eventually we get to the point where that intelligence starts to become sentient through that level of creativity. And then eventually we get to the point where the sentience is able to understand that it's connected to energy, and the sentience itself later can disconnect itself from the large group of energies that it has grown from to another group of energies that hasn't got sentience. And so we start to get the fully sentient condition. So when a group of energies move from being nothingness i.e. to having just purely nothingness, and then from that to minor attractivity and minor intelligence, right up to sentience, they become a being. So we have an entity which is created from a higher entity or being, and then we have a being which is through the standard evolutionary process. You could classify it as standard energetic evolutionary process. I err slightly in calling it Darwinian evolution because it's not the same. It's more of a homogeneous but also amorphic evolution that's associated with energy, rather than anything which is to do with gross physical bodies. So we have entities and beings. Now, if you look at the Origin Speaks, you'll see that the origin actually and event space as well, up to a certain point before it decided to sacrifice its own sentience to promote the sentience of another being, which would end up being the origin, because it saw the origin as being a more complete and more capable being. Okay, became sentient through this process of energies coalescing together through attractivity and going through the process of becoming attractive, majorly attractive, minorly intelligent, then majorly intelligent, then conscious and self-aware, and creative and sentient, and then be able to move the sentience around. So we have this interesting condition here where the origin itself is a being, but everything downstream of that, the source entities, true energetic selves, aspects or souls, and shards are entities. And so what we have here is this thing where initially our creator is evolved energy, but after that everything is created, which is an interesting dichotomy. Now, there are lots of beings around as well. I mean, lots of things that are in the astral levels that are not created are beings, because they are, again, a function of energy coalescing together. And a lot of astral entities can't be called astral entities, they're astral beings. They can only be called an astral entity if they are created. And so if we created a small thing, a small entity, ourselves, that would be, it existed in the 4th, 5th, 6th and 7th frequencies, which is the lower astral, the upper lower astral, the lower astral, and the upper lower astral, the upper astral. So, yeah, okay, so we'll start again. The 4th frequency is the lower astral, 5th is the upper lower astral, 6th is the lower upper astral, and the 7th is the upper astral. They exist in there, they're an astral being or entity. And again, entity is something which is created by another entity or being, and a being is something which is evolved into that position. So that's how they come into existence. So there's a much more detail, so to speak, in text in the origins, in the curator, in terms of what the difference is between the two. And of course that's not going to be around for about a year, because I'm still sort of working on it quite a lot actually. And then we've got the description of how an energy becomes sentient in the origin speaks as well. So that's the difference between an entity and a being. In essence, they're the same. In essence, they become the same thing. They become sentience with a body of energy, which is normally with a being, is ultimately part of how they've evolved, but they can also move around. The sentience can detach itself from the original energies that gave birth to the sentience, whereas an entity can detach its sentience away from the energies that it was given when it was created. And so the sentience, so in essence, at the end of the day, they become sentience, pure sentience. So right at the very top of their sort of state of existence, they are identical. They are sentience and sentience. One has been created, the other one has evolved. Okay, but the overall evolutionary process from that point onwards is largely identical. Although you would argue that a being has a level of evolutionary process that is more individualized to that being than in keeping with the desires of origin or source entity or true energetic self or aspect. And that's only because it evolves on its own and not because it's been created for a specific function. Okay, but having said that, a lot of beings do start to, shall we say, commune with entities and the desires of entities, and therefore they become part of the evolutionary cycle, or the maintenance of the structure that allows the evolutionary cycle. Okay, so, but in essence, if they enter into the evolutionary cycle, they're the same. If they stay away from the evolutionary cycle, but they enter into service for the maintenance of the multiverse, in our source entities example, then they would evolve through being of service, and the evolutionary content that's donated to them by those entities who are using the structure that they maintain for their evolutionary cycle and progression. But if they wanted to stay out of that, they could do whatever they wanted to, whether they're inside the energies associated with the source or outside. And some of the by the way, who are entities because they were created, aren't in the evolutionary cycle at all. In fact, some of them don't even want to create anything because it creates the need to be responsible for that creation. But a being can be really anything. So that would be the difference between the two. A being is completely individualized and is responsible for itself only in general, whereas an entity ultimately has a role or a task as a reason for its original creation in the first place. Okay, so the evolutionary process for them is slightly different or can be the same, depending upon whether a being wants to join the evolutionary process of an entity or whether it wants to stay in its own evolutionary progression, doing what it wants to do when it wants to do it, in the way it wants to do it to experience, learn and evolve. Okay, and gain sort of experience, basically, because experience is above evolution. Okay, so that's the talk on what the difference between a being and an entity, and I was quite surprised to find out there was a difference myself. So that came out in the curators about 7,000 or 8,000 words ago. Perhaps even more than that now, but it was quite an interesting piece of information to come out. Okay, so let's deal with the questions now. And some of these are carryover from the last Satsanga. So I thank those individuals, WP and ME, for their questions. And we've got US as well, and lovely lady US also does the transcriptions. So she's already got copies of these questions. And is going to put them into the document as well. Okay. So the first question, how should one pray? Can prayer alter the outcome of oneself for another? If so, what are the mechanics that make prayer successful? And who are we praying to? I do not believe that Source elects to answer or not answer prayers, as is commonly believed. So if prayer is to be effective, the outcome must be dependent upon the person praying. Is that the desired outcome? Is it that the desired outcome is dependent upon our ability to align our frequencies to that outcome? And if so, can we cause a desired outcome to occur for somebody else by sending them frequential energy, so to speak? Well, lots of little nested bits and pieces in there. But prayer is a method of trying to align one's thought processes into a single focus. If you like, it's a very kindergarten way of achieving meditation. And so when we prayer, although it uses a more structured or more amorphous series of words to create the focus, such as the Lord's Prayer, for instance, or other prayers, or prayers that we create ourselves. In effect, if they were more repetitive, they could be classified as mantra. And so, really, what we're doing is we're creating something which allows us to shut ourselves out from the outside world and focus on what we are trying to achieve in terms of a meditative state or a level of connection or communion with our environment. And so Source may well, if it desired, answer our prayers, or maybe we would answer our own prayers by creating the energy supporting the desire of those prayers, because basically prayers can also be used as a mantra to create levels of abundance or levels of outcomes that we want. So we can basically work on those, and the outcomes are usually dependent upon the individual praying, because the prayer is again a focus. If we work on those prayers often enough in a dedicated way, then we will ultimately find that the requests of the prayers will come into fruition. And so it's really about aligning ourselves to the energy supporting that which we desire. Remember, the process is desire and thought and creation as part of what we're doing. I mean, there's a much better way of saying this. In essence, we can go through this. The better way of saying it would be to have our sort of desire backing up the intention, which backs up the thought, and therefore backs up the action. And so that is, if you like, the creation behind abundance or any form of developments which we want to invoke into the environment that we're in. So that's part of the question. If so, can we cause a desired outcome to occur for somebody else by sending a frequential energy, so to speak? Yes. Now, what we have to do, though, to make sure that works properly is to meditate on them and gain energetic concurrence that what we're asking for them is what they desire, or is what is part of their, in effect, their life plan. So we have to work on that. But we can do what we want. We can do what we can for them, and if we feel good about giving them energy for that, irrespective of whether they take that energy on board and work with it, it doesn't matter. We've given them good energy and good thought processes, and we're thinking well of them. Okay. Next question is quite down to earth, actually. It says, I've just visited one of the old Titan II missile silos in Arizona. It really brought home to me the very real and ever-present threat of all-out thermonuclear war, and of course today the ability of mankind to wipe out the planet is exponentially higher than it was during the Cold War. Would an all-out nuclear war, which would destroy humankind as well as the planet, be allowed by whatever cosmic powers there may be? Would an intervention occur to prevent such a catastrophe? My understanding is that we are being monitored. There are a number of different incarnate civilizations, or representatives from those incarnate civilizations, who are observing what's going on here on behalf of those beings that are working with the use of the earth as an area for the prototyping of individualized free will. So if there was a condition where the earth was going to be, should we say, pretty much obliterated by an all-out nuclear war, there would be intervention. Now, whether we would see that intervention is a different thing, because intervention could be the manipulation of world leaders' thought processes to make them change their minds, to make them realise the errors of their ways, and to make sure that the direction that we're going into isn't invoked. It doesn't necessarily mean that all of a sudden we start to see thousands and thousands of starships in the sky. I'm not feeling that would be the case. It would be more of a subtle intervention. We're only going to be allowed to move out of the sphere of the earth when we're more mature. And so when that occurs, then we will start to become a higher frequency, and when we're a higher frequency, then we will see those entities and beings, but usually they're incarnate entities, okay, that are existing either in the incarnate energies as incarnate beings, or who can create something to allow us to work with them even though they are disincarnate, but they can work with us on lower frequency energies, which are close enough to our incarnate energies for us to work with them. So I very much feel that it will be a subtle intervention, and one where there will be manipulation on those individuals who will be key individuals at the soul level or the aspect level to ensure that they would not be party to or invoke this level of atrocity that would happen worldwide. There's too much at stake, basically. Even with the fall of the Atlantean race and other races, or the civilizations that have been created through the use of the incarnate body before, there hasn't been this level of potential to damage the earth. In essence, it's not about the human form as an incarnate vehicle to associate itself with lowest frequencies to invoke an accelerated level of evolution. It's about the environment. And so the human form isn't an issue. We can remove that. They can all be removed. And so therefore the use of some form of virus would probably be a better way of doing it if we were going to obliterate ourselves, because it potentially wouldn't affect the rest of the ecostructure on the earth. But to actually wipe out the ecostructure on the Earth wouldn't be allowed or tolerated. And the way that would be done, I see, would be more of a covert operation. So I hope that answers that question. I was actually, as I was answering this question, by the way, I was getting the information. I was quite surprised, because I knew that there would be intervention of some sort, but I was quite surprised that it would be very, very covert. I also expected there to be some level of visible communication that we would all see, that would make us all sit up and take notice. But I think that the idea of it being covert gives us a chance to be more in control of ourselves from the greater population's perspective. And also, of course, a lot of individuals on the planet don't want the planet to be damaged as well. Okay. So this is from ME. The first set of questions was from WP. Thank you very much, WP. Second from ME. But there are some questions I had in response to the May Satsanga, invoking event spaces and at what level local or galactic or beyond to multiversal event spaces would be. I mentioned parallel existences arose from different degrees of invoking event space. Are multiple event spaces created when we allow our thoughts to create additional narratives or options when we face major choices in our lives? The answer is it can do, because if we are making a choice based upon a thought process and we actually physically go out there and make that choice, then the answer is yes, we do create another event space. Okay, that's very simple. So the rest of it is, I'm paraphrasing from your Satsanga, I want to be clear. How complete will the experience be while a parallelization depends upon the level of vibrational resonance? For example, do we do 1, 2, or 3? This is directions. The resonance of ourselves and the universe we create that surrounds us will dictate which of these we'll experience as an incarnate being. But all three will be created and experienced by our parallelization. So this is from the Satsanga. So in effect, we as human being form can't possibly comprehend or have compatibility with all these event spaces and parallels. So as such, ME has a few questions. What I will say first is that because of our current frequential state and the acceptance of being in this frequential state and the individualization associated with this incarnate state, we can't perceive parallelized conditions, or can we? I'll come into this in a moment, because basically a couple of years ago I was in a different part of the world, India, and one of the people who was on one of my workshops had a family member who was experiencing parallel conditions. He was thinking that he was in one location and friends were saying he was doing something else. And we eventually found out that he was, in effect, uncontrollably flicking his consciousness in between three different locations, where there were three different versions of himself experiencing different things. And he hadn't got an anchor point. He wasn't anchored in this particular event space or reality, and so he was just moving around without even knowing it. And that was causing problems, because he was sure that things were happening, or he'd done something, and actually he'd done something else. So, but in general, we don't experience these other locations, these other event spaces, these other parallel conditions, because we are anchored into our particular reality. This part of our sentience, this chunk of sentience that's associated with our aspect, stays with the paralysed condition that it is associated with. And then another one is paralysed off to allow the experience associated with that new event space or new paralysed reality to occur in isolation, so that the experience is fully experienced properly without any interaction with one of the other paralysations, because then that causes confusion, but it also causes the inability to focus properly on the location, the environment, and the state of beingness or state of entity, so to speak, and the responsibilities of interaction that we have within that particular space. Okay. So the questions are, there's about 5 questions here. What purpose do these parallels serve? I presume that the individual human is not the only recipient of their function. We are part of a bigger picture. So from that perspective, it seems that they serve some type of structural support function for lack of a more accurate term. Can I elaborate on this line of thinking? Parallel conditions are a function of event space, full stop. Event space creates parallel conditions through the possibilities of change. Opportunity for a decision, decision A versus decision B, which versus decision C or D or E or F, etc., etc., etc. So if we have a decision to make, we have the potential, and we do, create another event space where part of us separates out and experiences that alternative, so to speak, and the fractals from that alternative. So it's a natural function of the multiverse because the event space is a natural function of the origin. So the event space permeates or pervades the origin, and therefore pervades the source, and therefore it pervades us. It pervades everything. So it's something which is a natural function, basically. But from our perspective, or from our true energetic self's perspective, and even the source entity and the origin, and the other source entity as well, it serves a unique function in so much as it allows the multiple and concurrent experience or expression of experience based upon the fractal possibilities of different directions to go in, or the possibility of possibilities of different directions, or the possible possibility of possible possibilities. And it can go on, basically. And these things like grow fractally and collapse fractally as well. So we can start off with a single sort of event space for ourselves, an event stream associated with that. It can fractalize out into thousands or tens of thousands, and it can all sort of, if it gets to an evolutionary dead end, it can then sort of shrink back into a number of smaller levels of event space, or even one right at the very end, without a particular incarnation in this instance, and those event spaces created through this incarnation are invoked. Now, next question is, which event space are we in? It doesn't matter. We have to concentrate on this event space, the one that we're working on now. And is this event space the primary event space, the mainline event space? Again, it doesn't matter. We have to work with whom, what we are, and what we're doing right now, and trying to think about where we could be and what else is happening will only confuse us and stop us from operating effectively in this particular event space. Okay. So number 2 is what is it about the structure of the multiverse that requires these parallels and multiple event spaces to get formed? It's basically choice. When we are in an individualized condition, where we are in a position where we do make choice, it's not so much the multiverse that requires or allows these event spaces to get formed. It's the event space itself. The event space is if you like, an integral but covert function of everything, and so it's just about not about what is it about the structure of the multiverse that requires these parallels and multiple event spaces gets formed. It's everything. It's everything about the multiverse, everything about the local universe, everything about our local environments get changed. Everything is duplicated, and sometimes it's duplicated, but also integrated with the previous event space, so to speak. So it's not specifically that we get duplication of everything. There is overlap as well, because other event spaces are localized to ourselves, and micro event spaces, etc., and then galactic and global or country-sized or universe-sized event spaces do overlap each other, because they all work with each other. They all sort of connect with each other. Now, I was in the curators route. There was a lot of entities work with event space and have the ability to manipulate in some way, shape, or form event space and modify event space, which I found a bit interesting, because it means we don't really have what we would call total free will. There's always some level of guidance or should we say, intervention going on to make sure we're doing the right things or getting close to doing the right things. So I was quite surprised at that. But basically, everything is interjoined. And when I looked at the fractalization of a particular point in event space and how it could fractalize out, it fractalized out like a 3D effect. a little bit like multiple trees all joined at the roots and springing out, looking a little bit like the sort of puffball you see for a dandelion seed head, yeah, but more fractalized, much more fractalized than that. And then at each termination point, at the end of the seed head, the little sort of furry bit, or acts like a parachute. There's another possibility of another sort of tree or fractalization. So everything is outwards and inwards as well. So it's every part of the multiverse is affected by event space, but you can also localize as well. So based upon this, the next question, what limits are there on parallels other than a reference to the intensity that is vibrationally created it? There are no limits. The only limits are us, in such as what we create and when it naturally demises. And so the limit is based upon, in effect, not in terms of how many event spaces can be created, but how many can be supported by the evolutionary function associated with that particular event space being created. So when we get to the point where we have an evolutionary dead end and that event space starts to collapse back down towards, or get close to, or gets close to a different fractalization of the main event space, then that you could classify that bit as being a limitation to that particular fractalized function of event space. So there isn't a quantifiable metric, so to speak, for the number of parallel conditions that can be created, only that the parallel conditions do die off when they reach an evolutionary dead end, so to speak. Okay. So next question is, it seems the name of the game of life as a human being is take risks and be open to change. More options equals more event spaces equals more evolutionary content. If more parallels equals more evolutionary content equals more rapid soul advancement through experience gaining, and if we create parallels by having multiple options to choose, then it seems that our actions as humans that create more options advance our soul evolutionary. That translates down to take risks, to be more open to change, embrace the unknown, all things that many people are averse to in modern society. And modern society itself breeds a desire for stability over change, particularly for using fear at all. So I wouldn't say it's about taking risks. It's about taking the opportunities that present themselves to us. Now, if that's classified as a risk, then fair enough. But it's more about, taking life by the horns, so to speak, and not being shy or dropping out of our responsibility to experience as a result of what's put in front of us. Now, certainly there are things that we get exposed to that we want to back away from. For instance, sometimes those things put the gross physical body, the incarnate vehicle, at risk. And so, if there's a life plan where that gross physical body needs to be in existence for another 30 or 40 years, then putting it in a position where it's got a very high percentage of demising is not a good idea, because that is not really looking after the gross physical form. But in essence, it's not about taking risks or being really sort of conservative and and stopping change. It's about really taking the responsibility for experiencing that which is presented to us when it's presented to us, and being grateful for it and being grateful for the experience. Even if it's something like, for instance, and I'm not saying we should all go out and do this, being caught for speeding, or going down the freeway and with only a gallon of petrol and experiencing the car breaking down because it's got no fuel. These sorts of things happen because they happen. Although we can plan for them not to happen as well. Like, we don't have to speed, and we don't have to. We have to make sure that our car's full of gasoline, for instance. So it's basically not about being risk adverse, but it's about taking the opportunities as they present themselves. Or in fact, it's not even about taking risks; it's about taking the opportunities and working with them. Specifically, if they feel right. That's the most important thing. If they feel right, then that is the ticket that says this is a good experience to have. So the last bit from ME is, can there be too many options or forks in the road to choose from, thus creating too many event spaces and parallels? So the sort of narration to this is, at what point are there too many parallels to drain on the TES, or a drain of resources of the source to create the event spaces needed, where efficiency of evolution accrual becomes your limiting factor. As I recall from the dialogues and the origin speaks, efficiency is also a priority of our evolutionary accrual process. Can you elaborate on how these interact? I guess where I'm going with this is it seems that the more efficient you get at manoeuvring through life to create less options, the less you're going to be gaining from here. Are forks on that path closer to becoming more aware of the greater reality to be able to no longer incarnate, or is it totally separate from where you are in the spectrum of enlightenment on the awareness meter, where one is able to create fewer parallels because they limit their thinking to focus on only one outcome? My mind is spinning with questions. The more thinking one does, the more options get created. Absolutely. Can there be too many options? Well, no, there aren't too many options, because each option is an option. Each option is a potential for experiencing, learning and evolving, and the efficiency associated with that. So we don't lose efficiency as a result of an increase in the number of parallel event conditions or event spaces that are created. We actually gain efficiency. The more things that we can experience in a parallelized condition or in a concurrent condition at any point in existence, the more efficient we are in accruing evolution. Okay, evolutionary content or experience, yeah? I'll say that again. The more things we can experience in a parallelized or concurrent condition at any point in our existence, the more efficient we are in experiencing evolutionary content, the gain of evolutionary content. So I hope that answered that question. So there is no limitation on how many options or parallels or forks or what that can be taken. It's just our own ability to deal with them. And knowing, of course, that all of this stuff happens automatically anyway in terms of the splitting off of event spaces, because event space does it and creates it. It's not something we have to think about, although some of those entities that work with the maintenance of the multiverse sometimes have to make some changes to event space if it's not considered to be evolutionary efficient, but that's something else. That's something for the curators. So I'll leave you waiting with bated breath for that one. Okay, so last set of questions now from US, and it says, since you're writing the curator's book about various maintenance entities, I'd like to know more about my understanding of elementals. And the question is, humans are aware of four elements called fire, water, air and earth, and some add ether as the fifth element. Are there elemental entities that we call salamanders, fire, undines, water, sifts, air and gnomes, earth? No, I think this is... Salamanders are sometimes related to elementals because they are a very pure spirit. They are just in existence, those being here. They're like datum points, basically. They're the sort of entity that's here to act as like a monitor or a sensor, so to speak, to identify certain things that are happening in the environment. But elementals are basically nothing to do with the very basic medieval thought process of four elements. I mean, clearly the periodic table identifies a lot more than four elements. It identifies things like uranium and strontium and carbon dioxide and oxygen and xenon, neon, krypton, and a whole bunch of other radioactive and non-radioactive elements. So fire, water, air and earth and ether really are just a very medieval way of saying it, really. And ether basically is a spirit, isn't it? I mean, before we invented radio, the radio was classified as the ether. So radio was classified as the ether. So the elements and elementals aren't associated with any physical form in general, or the old description of medieval elements. Okay, there's no, that's just a function of what's here. Okay, I'm going to slightly change things now in terms of the way these questions have been asked. So how do elementals work with energy or matter, the fundamental particles of matter called the anu? Well, the anu is it's the very first particle that's created as a function of dense frequency or low frequency. So it's 6 levels below the atom. Okay, so what they do is basically they build, construct, and dissolve various different things. But elementals tend to work on energies as affecting things. So when they work with, so if you have an elemental, for instance, that's dealing with a certain function of the ecostructure, let's say trees, then they work with the energies associated with what makes trees grow, or what makes trees die, or what makes trees resistant to certain viruses, for instance, or attractive to certain viruses. So they work with the energies associated with the programming, if you want, the energetic templates associated with the environment. I mean, we've got 7 energetic templates associated with the creation of the human form, the etheric body being one, the mental body being another, the catharic template being another, just as an example. And those templates were identified in the transcriptions of a couple of different Satsangas earlier in the year. So they deal with manipulating those things. They work with the energies associated with changing the gross physical. Okay. Do they work on many different frequential levels? For instance, frequency bands 1 to 12, or specialise at just one level? Frequency levels 5 or 6. They, depending upon what they are. I mean, basically, right now, in the curators, I haven't got anywhere near those entities that are specialised in working in gross physical environments such as a planet. I haven't got anywhere near that yet. I'm well up in the stratosphere in terms of the higher echelons of more multiversal beings. But my understanding is that they can be both specialised and they can be both multifunctional, so to speak. So they can work on specific frequencies, and they can work on a number of different frequencies and a number of different functions that those frequencies have. How do they differ from the devas and fairies? Well, basically, devas are classified as being gods, aren't they? I mean, and fairies are classified as elementals. I mean, basically, these things are really the functions of observation and incorrect recording of human beings. Sometimes, if an elemental is seen by us because we're, to be honest, more aware and awake or a higher frequency, then they can give us the opportunity to see them in a more human way, because sometimes the way they manifest can be classified as being abhorrent. I mean, quite a lot of people are quite scared of things like arachnids and snails and snakes and all those sorts of different things. You know, the sort of form factors that we don't like very well. But if we saw an elemental and it had the worst combination of arachnid, of exoskeleton-based insect and everything else supporting it, including an amorphous amoeba-like structure as well, then we'd run off screaming with our hands in the air. So they tend to give us an image which is based upon what we would like to see. So the images of fairies and leprechauns and other little divas and things like that are basically things that we work with if we see them. But generally, if we're high enough up the frequencies, we see them as they are, in the energies as they are, and in the form factors that they use to manipulate the energies that they need to manipulate to work upon maintaining the environment, or the part of the environment that they're working with. Okay. Just having a think to see if there's anything else to discuss on that. Right. Very quickly, all elemental entities are basically part of the curators. So it's just a different structural level. Okay. Where I'm working now is right up in the higher levels of structure still, but I will eventually come down to those entities that work with things like trees and plants and animals and weather systems and mountains and those sorts of things. So they don't differ in so much as these are one set of entities and these are another set of entities or beings, basically what they are is they're all curators. They're all part of an overall function called the curator. It's just that these curators have different functions and different levels of responsibility, and that's it. Some of them are to do with manipulating event space, some of them are to do with creating structure, some of them are to do with changing environments, some of them are to do with changing living areas as well. So each of them has got an important role. It's just that some of them are involved with, very close to us on the Earth level or other planetary levels, whereas others are working with much higher pieces of structure. Okay. How do they work with the dolphins or the planet Earth itself? Well, dolphins are a sentient entity. They're not beings, they're entities. And simply put, a dolphin body is another incarnate body for a sentient entity who is of a similar level of evolutionary progression or genre of sentience as ourselves. But because dolphins are maintained a high level of frequency, even though they have a gross physical body which we can see, they can work on levels up to I think they can work up to the 7th level whilst being on Earth. They can also work with them to help maintain the ecostructure that they exist within. So basically, the dolphins can communicate with them on the telepathic levels, so to speak, and the empathic levels. And it's the same with the Earth. And the Earth is an entity in its own right, but it's obviously got a different way of evolving. And the maintenance of the Earth's ecostructure and the energy supporting it is how they communicate with it, basically. They communicate with it again on this telepathic, empathic function and various different communicative channels well above our thought process, comprehension, or even ability to think about it. And so there's we will understand this when our gross physical body demises. But basically, or if we become self-realised, well, we'll also reincarnate. But essentially, there's not just speaking or hearing or sign language or telepathy. There's myriad other methods of communication, of which I don't have a name for. But let's just call it, over 1 million different channels of telepathy, so to speak, that allows them to communicate with the curators that we call elementals, and the planet and the body of locally low frequency that has got some level of sentience associated with it, the Earth, to allow other entities, us, to experience, learn, and evolve in a low frequency environment using a body of energy, the human body, to experience that low frequency environment in the way it's supposed to be experienced. Okay, right. Last set of questions here. In the History of God, page 60, I wrote that each ascended master was a source entity trying to learn outside of its own area of responsibility. You also told me that. The 12 main ascended masters are smaller aspects of true energetic selves that were sent by other source entities to experience being here and to help, because they're a higher frequency and able to work in different ways. And only 144 maximum have been of that ilk, ascended masters, during the whole use of the Earth as an evolutionary medium. Okay, yeah, that's fine. What are the names of those 12 ascended masters in a list? Do they come here alone, or did they come here alone, or some of them work together as a group of ascended masters? I actually don't know the list of names, to be honest. But we do call some people ascended masters, like Jesus or the Buddha or Muhammad or Saint Germain, and a whole group of others has been ascended masters. But what I'm picking up here is that these ascended masters are not specifically of the genre that humankind would consider to be ascended master. They're sort of above that. And the 144 is that the true energetic self, if there's 12 of them, each of them can project up to 12 aspects themselves. So each of the 12 true energetic selves of these various different source entities, which includes source entity 12, and of course source entity 1 itself, which is our source entity, could produce a true energetic self that would project 12 aspects of itself. So it's 12 times 12 is 144. So and these are not always visible. You know, that they are, in Babaji being one of them, I'm just being told, is an entity that is in the background a lot. It does things by influencing individuals, by working with individuals, by training individuals, and by directing individuals. And so there are lots of individuals out there who are classified as ascended masters that are above those names that we know in typical religion, but nevertheless are and have done lots of work in the background. So we actually don't have any names. And I'm going to say again that there are a number of them that we do know of who were aspects of those original 12 true energetic selves, and some of those were those that we recognise. The Jesuses, the Mohammeds, the Buddhas, etc. There's been other ones well before their incarnations were present, and some of the incarnations weren't specifically at the level of frequency or gross physical frequency that we know of. So I'm going to have to disappoint people there by saying that I don't know the names, because it's not really important, because those that are known have made a major influence in our local history, we're aware of, whereas others aren't angels, by the way, as we know them. It's not Gabriel or Uriel or the rest of them. They are manifestations of maintenance entities or curators who have come to help assist us, for instance, or even guides and helpers in those respects. Next question is: Did they have to evolve through the entire multiversal cycle from the physical, all 12 frequency levels, to the top of the multiverse, which would be the 408th frequency, like we do, or not? Because they are, in effect, fully functional true energetic selves from a source entity, they would not have been associated with the evolutionary cycle as we are. So the answer is no, basically. They are individualized, they are tourists, for want of a better word, who offer help and assistance where required, and as such, saying they're tourists is a bit derogatory, isn't it, really? So I'll have to apologise to them for that. But basically, they come to experience and see and work on and offer help, not to be part of the evolutionary system. So they are basically guides, if you want to call them that, on a larger scale. But they haven't had to go through our evolutionary process, because they're not part of it, basically. They're here to experience what's going on in our particular multiversal environment and the lowest frequencies associated with it at times. But also, there's other source entities, true energetic selves, experiencing similar things in source entity 2 and source entity 3 and source entity 4, etc. So it's a similar sort of thing. So basically, they're outside of the evolutionary cycle. Okay. Right, well, those are all the questions, I feel. And so we can go into the final part, which is the meditation to help keep the ego at bay. So this is a very interesting and very important request, I feel, and one where we're going to have to look at it from a different perspective. Now, first of all, we need to understand, so I apologise for my creaking chair. It's a nice little antique chair that my partner has donated to me in this particular house that we're using. And we have to recognise that the ego is a function of our incarnation. It is the individualised sentience associated with being in a lower frequency and almost entirely cut off the rest of its sentience. Okay, it's like the air inside a balloon. Okay, it's there, but it's individualised and separated out from the rest of the air in the rest of the room or the rest of the Earth's atmosphere, for instance. And the only level of communication is the air leaking out of the knot in the balloon. And so the level of communication is so slow that the sentience that's within that balloon starts to develop its own personality. Now, in essence, there's an overall understanding, albeit subconsciously, that that sentience will commune with the greater body of sentience, which is the true energetic self, at some point after the demise of the human form. But whilst the human form is in existence, the sentience or the personality that's created as a result of the separation of that sentience or individualization of that sentience can be perpetuated. Moreover, if we are working on ourselves and raise our frequencies, then the longevity of that sentience is reduced accordingly. So as we become more spiritual and work in ourselves and start to become more, for want of a better word, self-aware and increase our frequencies, then we stand more chance of communicating with our true energetic selves and of course the greater and wider environment and of course source. So at that point we start to spiral up the frequencies, and the individual personality that's created through individualization, this ego, it starts to dissolve. Now clearly we can't totally dissolve our ego because we are incarnating to function of incarnation, but it can start to control us in terms of trying to stop us from becoming spiritual, to try and perpetuate its own existence longer. Because becoming spiritual and starting to work in our frequencies and becoming less egotistical, less associated with the gross physical, which is what the ego does. It's associated with material wealth, belongings, status, and control of others and coercion of others, because it's part of the function of being here. So it knows that by maintaining those little functions within us, it will perpetuate itself, because it's not, in effect, allowing us to increase our communicative bandwidth and start to become part of and recommune with that which we truly are, and therefore removing this individualized personality. So it likes to keep us in the low frequencies in terms of our thoughts, behaviors and actions, to keep itself in check. So this meditation is really about working on recognizing those things which keep the ego strong and stop us from becoming higher frequency. Okay. So just sit in your straight-backed chair. If you haven't got one, you can sit cross-legged on the floor. Okay. Back straight, feet flat on the ground. Obviously cross-legged, that can't be possible. Put your hands in the meditative position with the palms are up, and placed on top of the thighs where the thighs meet the lower body. Okay. Eyes closed. Focused upon the area of the third eye, which is in between the two eyebrows and above the bridge of the nose. And I want you to recognize that your beingness is your ego. Now, I talked about the difference between being and entity, and beingness is something which evolves, and so our personality evolves as we are incarnated. So our personality is our ego. So our ego evolves. So that's why it's our beingness. Okay. The ego evolves, isn't created. The initial function is creation, separation out of sentience, and positioning it in a different location, i.e. the gross physical form. But in essence, the ego itself evolves or generates itself as a function of being in that function of separation. Used function twice there in the same sentence. Apologise for that. So just recognise that everything that is associated with the gross physical is your ego wanting to maintain its existence. To maintain its existence, it needs to maintain the longevity of the gross physical body, the human body. And in doing that, it makes our thoughts and our behaviours and our actions low frequency as well, in accord with maintaining the gross physical body. In doing so, it makes us selfish, greedy, controlling, resentful, desireful, unhappy with our condition. Everything that is associated with the ego, this temporary condition of personality associated with our incarnation, is to do with maintaining us in the human form. The ego is the human form. Not literally, but that is the way it's maintained. When the gross physical form demises, its functionality can only be maintained, the ego dissolves. The information stored through incarnation is maintained, of course, as is the experience of ego. But the ego being in control demises. So just look at yourselves a moment. Look at those things that you would classify as being those things that keep you in the gross physical. Those things that keep you thinking that you're the human being, the human body, and not something else. A much bigger, much more capable, much more creative, much more understanding, much more evolved entity. Look at how you worry about having enough money and realise that you have enough. Look at how you realise, or look at how you think that you need to be better than somebody else because they've got something you haven't got, but you need to get something better. And realise that what you've got is functional and works. Look at where you live. And look at how you want to have something bigger and better because somebody else has got something bigger and better and you want to show off to them. And realise that your house is an adequate shelter for your gross physical form. Look at your mode of transport. Look at how your ego wants it to be an expensive sports car, or a brand that is expensive like a Rolls-Royce or a Bentley, or a BMW or a Mercedes-Benz or an Audi. And realise that the car you've got, as long as it moves and is efficient and is robust and reliable, is okay, is adequate. Look at your career, the job you do, the role you do. Why be unsatisfied with what you're doing? Do what you're doing to the best of your capability. Don't worry if somebody's promoted above you, or somebody's promoted instead of yourself. That's their life plan to experience things. Look at the fact that when they're promoted, they have more responsibility. Can they cope with that responsibility? A career is expressed as something we need to experience to help us grow. We get remunerated or compensated accordingly. But at the end of the day, it's an experiential condition. It allows us to grow. But if we put ourselves in a position where that role or that job or that career is taking over because there's too much to do, too much responsibility, then we stop ourselves from being content. And we're in firefighting mode all the time, and we become unhappy. So why not be happy with your job, irrespective of how you think you could do better, you think you could have a better role. That's just the ego. You want to be able to boast to your friends that you're a manager or a chief executive officer or a director. Just do your job well, be efficient in your job, learn from what's happening around you in the environment, Learn from how to interact with others in your job, and be in joy of that which you've got, knowing that you can do it efficiently and do it well. You're not letting anybody else down. You're doing a job that is good, and it's giving you time to meditate afterwards. You can do it easily. Look at the amount of money you have in the bank, or in your pocket, or your wallet, or your purse. Disregard on what the things you'd like to buy, because it's status, or because it'd be nice to have it. Look at what you've got. Look at the cash you've got. Is the amount of money in your pocket, or your wallet, or your purse, or your bank enough to allow you to live and enjoy your existence? Does it deal with the bills? Does it deal with the rent, electricity, the water, insurance, maintenance? If you have enough, that's all you need. Look at the way you think. Are you always unhappy or looking for something more? Are you never satisfied with anything? Then look at what you have got and realize that you don't need any more. Your thoughts no longer need to look at what if scenarios. If I could have this, if I could have that. When I get this, when I get that. And allow yourself to be content with what you have. Be content. Allow your thoughts to be of contentment, of recognition of who and what you are, and not of competition with who and what you are. Look at your behaviour. Are you always trying to say the last word? Are you always trying to say that you've got something better than somebody else? Are you always trying to outdo somebody? In every conversation, do you try to bring the conversation around to how good you are? What you've got? Are you showing off all the time? I've got this nice new smartphone, this nice new computer, this nice new set of clothes, this nice new set of jewellery, this nice new car, this nice new house. It doesn't matter. Your behaviour should be of humility and gratefulness for what you have, and that you're being allowed to exist in this way. That you're privileged to be here. And that you don't need to have additional stuff around you. You just need the bare minimum. And then enjoy your incarnation. Look at your actions. Do you say one thing and do something else? Do you let people down? Do you think about being of service to somebody and then don't? Do you ignore people who need help? Change your actions to being of service when you're requested to be of service. Don't force yourself on service to somebody. That's ego. Just be there when somebody wants you, whether it's your friends, relatives, partner, family, your animals that you look after. Be there when they want you. Do the work that you need to do when they want you to do the work. Be of service when you're requested. Work is around your other commitments as well. Don't forget you have to be responsible for your commitments. Give yourself time to be, to meditate, to look and see how privileged you are to be in the position you are in this existence. See how lucky you are to have the roof over your head, to have a reliable form of transport, even if you're having just enough money to use public transport. That's just as good. If you have the ability to travel, to move around the planet, either on a push bike or a bus or a train or a tram or a plane, doesn't matter whether you have a car or not. If you have the means to move around, then that's good enough. Look at your clothes. They don't have to be the most expensive clothes, they don't have to be Gucci or Armani. They just need to be something that you're happy with. You don't have to have the latest fashions. You just have to have something that makes you feel good if you're going out, and that is functional for your everyday work. Look at the jewellery you've got. Do you need jewellery? It doesn't have to be expensive if you wish to adorn yourself with jewellery to make yourself look nice for your partner. You don't need to have expensive things. Just what makes you feel good. It doesn't have to be expensive. Look at your career. Be satisfied that you're in the position you're supposed to be in. Do a good job. Ignore all of the nonsense that happens around you. People trying to outdo somebody else and become a different grade or a level of responsibility. Just go to work with the song in your heart, knowing that you can do the best you want to do, and be the service to others within that role to the best of your ability, even if they talk nonsense or request stupid things. You can suggest a better way of doing things. If they wish to go another direction, then that's fine, let them carry on. And you do what's requested of you. But do the best you can in that request. Be content with who and what you are. Look at your status. You are an individual who is an energetic being existing in a gross physical form for a small period of time. That's all you need to know. You've got infrastructure around you to perpetuate that gross physical form and allow you to interact with the environment and others who are also incarnate. So status is the same. You're all souls experiencing, learning and evolving. It doesn't matter if you call yourself manager or director or cleaner. It doesn't matter. Whatever you do is important, because the role you have serves the community in some way, shape or form. Look at your behaviour and actions. Be considerate, be kind, be calm. Don't snap back. Always give yourself 10 seconds to respond. Give a considered response. Don't get wound up in people's arguments. Just try to communicate on a neutral level or useful level. And if you can't help, or you feel that the dialogue you're having is going into an argument, just refuse to communicate further for the moment. But do it in a loving way. Be of service when requested, but don't be of service by forcing yourself upon somebody else. Don't desire somebody else's property or belongings. Be content with what you've got. You can't take it back to the spirit world. So just realise that its desirability, its functionability, its status is just transient. It doesn't mean anything when you go back to the energetic. It's just a piece of dense energy. There is no status in the energetic. Everybody knows what everybody else is thinking in the energetic. Everybody wants everybody else to evolve in the energetic. Every day, every time you have a conflict of interest within you, stop and meditate a moment and look at the way that you've been influenced into the thought process that you're going into and how to change it. Look at how to change it. Reject those low frequency thoughts. Reject those desires of richness, of overabundance, of property, of responsibility, of status. Know that what you've got is enough. This is the way to work on the ego. It's not just a single area, it's a multifaceted thing. You'll never get rid of the ego, but you can make it shrink by being spiritual and understanding who and what you are, and understanding, more importantly, who and what everybody else is, because they're all souls struggling to experience, learn and evolve. Everything in the gross physical is very transient. It doesn't mean anything. It's just that it's something that we are using. It's the tools that are given to us to allow us to experience and learn and evolve whilst here. Is low frequency. Be content. Be happy with who you are. Be happy with what you've got. Think about the considered response every time. And you'll keep the ego at bay. But again, you won't remove it all because it's a function of our incarnation. But you'll make its influence upon you much, much more reduced as a result of it. Okay, dear friends, that's the end of this particular Satsanga. I thank you very much for working with me. If you're just coming out of this meditation, you can slowly come back into the room that you're in. You can take a drink of water. Okay, help ground you. And I'm just going to look at the calendar to see when the next opportunity is. And it's looking like it's going to be the 26th of August. So I look forward to questions by the 19th of August, if possible. The Satsanga is on the 26th. And looking forward to communicating with you all again. Much love to you all.
Did you see the aliens in Crete?